Here we are again, Created Souls podcast, the creation of self. And we've been talking about different reasons for the soul, as well as this antiquated notion, this age-old notion of the immortality of the soul, the immortality of the person. Um, and I wanted to talk about some of the kind of the plausibility structure undergirding the creation of self, the book, and the argument therein. It has to do with an age-old discussion about the origin of souls and the origins of persons, um, which is an older philosophical discussion, as well as a quite rich religious and theological discussion throughout history, which has over modern history and leading into our contemporary times in scholarship has become quite an outdated mode of discussion. Um, but because, well, in fact, there's multiple influences here why it's become an outdated discussion. Because for one, many people started denying the doctrine of the soul, and the soul started becoming irrelevant in many ways to a wider set of issues and topics. And so, obviously, related to this, theology itself is a discipline in which this discussion took place. Waned in authority, and theological discussions became less relevant to other discussions altogether. Materialism, again, of course, was on the rise in the 1900s, mid 1900s, leading up to the contemporary times, only now to be replaced with um, and alternatives that actually take seriously the mind and consciousness again and are retrieving older ideas and rethinking how it is that we understand consciousness as a feature of the world we live in. But as this consciousness discussion is emerging and developing and going forward, not just in philosophical circles, but also in theological religious circles, in neuroscience, and even in the public sphere, we're noticing also a renewed interest once again in this age-old discussion about the origin of the soul or the origins of persons, and rightly so. And if this is the case, that there is something immaterial in the world, in fact, that is foundational or even central to its explanations, then this discussion becomes alive and well once again as as an important discussion that impacts other discussions, other topics that are relevant to us today, including science and the nature of science itself. And so it's alive and well, and we should engage in this discussion once again. And in fact, that's part of the plausibility or the rationale, you might say, for my writing The Creation of Self. The argument that I developed that we are in fact souls, and that if we are in fact souls, then some form of creation of persons is true. The fact that God or something like God or some agent creates us directly and immediately, or brings us into existence in some way, and has some robust causal role to play in the production of us. And if that's the case, or if it's the case that at the base of nature, the base of material reality is some sort of consciousness or some sort of mental reality, then that changes a lot of things. That reframes a lot of the discussions in important ways that need to be opened up again and afresh. And so the origin of the soul discussion does the same thing. It opens up afresh how we again think about the nature of persons, but also the origins of persons, where they came from. Uh, if they're not solely physical, they're not solely biological, the biological origins that our bodies have can't, at least wholly or sufficiently, probably explain who we are and how we come into existence, then some other explanation needs to be given. And the origin of the soul discussion opens that up in a fresh new way that points us once again back to this elephant in the room that we have to kind of deal with, that there is this agent, supernatural agent, or intelligent agent of some sort, God or something like God, that brings us into existence, that brings these immaterial beings into existence. And we have to take that seriously. So this leaves us with some options that we may come back to and discuss again at a later date. But this leaves us with some options. Historically, there have been three predominant options, maybe four, but three predominant options. There's been what's called the pre-existence view of the soul, which has been was discussed in antiquity with Plato and Platonic followers, as well as the theologian Origen, that affirms something like our souls pre-exist our bodies in some form or fashion, pre-existed eternally maybe, or pre-existed it in some sort of heavenly state. That has largely fallen on hard times. I don't know anyone who actually defends that. I wish I would find some. I'm trying to find someone because I recently co-edited a work on the origin of the soul where we had a conversation about the different views and how they open up a fresh different discussions in science and things of the sort, where theology actually is relevant and matters again. But I couldn't find anybody who would defend that particular view. So then, broadly speaking, there is the creationist view, which is something I affirm, given the title, "The Creation of Self," that we as persons, as souls, are directly and immediately created by God, or a being like God, a supernatural agent and being that is actually intelligent, that can actually bring us about, because we're not the kind of beings that could actually be generated in some way by material processes and the like. And there's lots of arguments, I think, that make good on why that is the case. But then there's a similar view that still has some, at one level, creationist intuitions. And even in most expositions of the view, at least one, if not two, persons, probably Adam and Eve, were created directly and immediately. And this is the view called Traducianism, where souls are the kinds of things that are either prurient, they give off parts like atoms that break off parts or something, or like clay that can be taken off and create new souls as it conjoins with the body or something, a sufficiently complex body and brain and central nervous system, or that like atoms, these souls are able to be split. And when they split off and join another body, they become an individualized human being of some sort. But that again presupposes something like creationism. So in the creation of self, the argument that I make would probably be consistent with some versions of Traducianism, even maybe, possibly. That's an open discussion, and we can have that discussion, of course, for those who are interested and who are interested in joining the private group and subscribing. We can discuss that further. Then there's more recently, of course, there's what's called the emergentist account, and it's not clear that this is. Seems to me that it is a novel account in history, given the rise of materialistic science and modern philosophy. It doesn't fit quite clearly in Traducianism. Certainly doesn't fit in creationism, although it might be a form of creationism, but not a traditionally affirmed creationism where we are created by God, but rather something like a material creation ex nihilo. And that's, in fact, one objection that has been raised to these sorts of views where persons or souls emerge from suitably complex bodies and brains. And they're the logical entailment of a sufficiently complex brain and body. That's a new view. And of course, there's the view that denies the soul altogether, materialism that we've described, that would say that persons are, just sufficiently complex bodies or animals, sufficiently complex animals, or to use the older language of Aristotle, rational animals that are sufficiently complex in nature. And this is another option on the table in these discussions. But of course, that opens itself up to, or closes itself off from, um, uh, relevant theological information that might come into this wider discussion, and that might point us back to God Himself. But it's an important discussion to have. And so this, again, is the plausible kind of rationale that is motivating the creation of self, as I've been talking about.